Hello there. You're listening to the Prisoner's Dilemma Co-operative podcast, where n equals the number of hosts, and n is the second prime number.
That was your first host, Nick, and speaking is your second host, Mike. And immediately afterwards, we'll have our third host, Matt.
And here is your third host, Matt.
Hello, I'm your first host again, Nick. We are going to be talking about the series of blog posts called Replacing Guilt by Nate Soares. And we're going to start with the first two, as is tradition. The very first one is called Half-Arsing It with Everything You've Got.
All right. First, a bit of introduction to the blog. The blog itself is part of the rationalist sphere, let's say, a loose connection of people that try to further the cause of rationality. In this particular sequence of posts that we'll examine, Nate delves into how to better use one's own motivation in ways that hopefully don't hurt yourself and make you use more efficiently this very scarce resource.
I'll say as well that if you've just picked up this podcast randomly and you have no idea what rationality is, I'd recommend a podcast called The Bayesian Conspiracy. If you just type however you think Bayesian is spelt, Google will probably work it out for you. Bayesian Conspiracy, and podcast number 5 from them is about an introduction to rationality. We won't go into it now, we would just be echoing what they're saying.
Yeah, and also you may want to research sequences or rationality from AI to zombies by Eliezer Yudkowsky.
And I'm just going to say, just type in Eliezer Yudkowsky however you want, and nobody gets it right on their first try.
I mean, I'm kind of partial to Big Yud.
Big Yud. Let's see. I just want to see if you Google Big Yud, does that come up with? It comes up with Eliezer Yudkowsky. Big Y-U-D, Big Yud.
All right. Anyway, getting back on topic, half-assing it with everything you've got. The basic idea that is proposed in this post is that you don't actually need to break your back just because you're supposed to be doing something. Nate is bringing a lot of examples from university, but I believe this actually applies even more to one's job in a private sector. But if you're studying for a class, for a final test, you don't just need to study 14 hours a day, although I've done that in the past, just because. You also have to realize what the appropriate amount of effort for the class is worth. For example, a class on an optional course which doesn't impact your grade that much can be half-assed.
Just to jump in with something you said there, Mike, is that so I'm going to quote word for word a lot from this blog post because I think it's incredibly well written, but he opens it by saying the college environment implicitly attempts to convince students that their preferences point over rightward, and rightward in this case is just saying as high quality as possible. And it's saying if you want to get the absolute highest mark possible, that's absolutely fine, like work as hard as you physically can, but if your intention is only to actually pass the class, pass the class.
Yes, class the pass.
Yeah, yep, that cool. That's going to be our first in-joke of class the pass. If your intention is only to pass the class, then there's no point in breaking your back, as you say, to get the highest possible mark. If you only need a 60, aim for 61%, so you're giving yourself a little bit of wiggle room.
Yeah, in short, you should just identify how well do you want to do, what is your acceptable and what is your desirable outcome, and aim for it for the minimum effort.
Exactly, and it's not just in class as well. He's talking about he's got lots of examples. It's just anything in life. If your intention is to cook a meal to make sure you don't starve, fine. Like there's lots in culture saying, oh, you have to be able to cook 5 dishes and they have to be, gluten-free and vegan and everything like that. No, if you want to eat because you're hungry, just eat Huel, if that's your only intention. If you want to eat something tasty, then you can also eat something tasty or order in takeaway.
Yes, I have. For those not in the know, Huel is a kind of substitute food that I've actually eaten, but and it's basically powder that you put in a shake and then drink. And that's a completely nutritional meal. This is not a joke. This is what it's marketed as and sold as. But this brings me... you were saying?
I was just going to say that, you say nutritionally complete, and people are very sceptical of that, but I've read blog posts where people have read it, drank Huel for a month or two, gone to their doctors after, and the doctor's been like, yeah, you're fine. So it's a real thing. Sorry, I don't want to start talking about Huel non-stop, just I feel like I've got to step in and defend Huel.
Yeah, I mean, I stopped drinking it because it was just kind of bland after a while. But this brings me to a point which actually impacts people in their daily lives. And why half-assing it with everything you've got, that is putting in the barest minimum amount of effort, can sometimes be very hard. In my experience, people shame you for half-assing things in a way that is not publicly approved. Like I said, I've eaten Huel, and I've gotten a lot of flack for eating it. From friends and family repeating to me, you're drinking that strange new thing instead of doing something simple and cooking for yourself a full course of pasta with handmade sauce done in this specific way. It's so easy, why can't you do it?
I got compared to drinking breast milk the first time I started drinking Huel.
Oh god, that's worse. Anyway.
Don't shame me.
Anyway, the point is preparing stuff in the way that people say, or putting in the amount of effort for the example that I'm going to be talking about in 10 minutes, oftentimes is not as simple and easy as it's made out to be, and you can have a lot of pushback from people being envious or being irritated that you're taking a shortcut, even though the shortcut is would also be in their own benefit.
Yes, I think this may be partially explained because we tend to treat putting the maximum amount of effort possible as signaling our commitment.
Yes, in fact, see also like the entirety of Japanese culture.
Yeah.
Since this is also aimed at actual people on the street, I'm just spitballing here, and I would really welcome your own opinions, both from my hosts and from the people reading this podcast. Well, yes, reading with their ears by listening. Anyway.
No, we're now calling our listeners readers.
Yes, exactly.
Hello, readers. We're talking to you.
Yes. Anyway, a way to circumvent this is to show the places elsewhere where you are putting in a lot of effort. So, distract others from the things that would make them criticize you.
Yeah, and you might also point that you can put more effort in these other things that are more important for you because you save your effort, you save your willpower by half-assing on the thing that other people think you should put maximum amount of effort in.
Yes, that's excellent.
Just a broad sort of point that I think we're going to keep coming back to. I read a comment on Reddit, I think it was, maybe a year ago, just saying that all these self-help books and life coaching classes and things like that are generally just like common sense, but they're presented in a way that particularly speaks to you. And if you say to somebody, oh, do you consider that like you're spending too much time cooking because society tells you that you should cook, you don't enjoy it, you don't get anything out of it, maybe you should consider spending less effort on cooking and, eat Huel one meal a day. It's common sense of just like, don't do things that are stressful and that you feel you have to do. But I think replacing guilt is really good at putting things in a way that speaks to me personally, of just like, seem obvious in retrospect, but I should be putting less effort into things I don't care about.
Yes, I mean, in this case, this particular post aims to destroy guilt by making you happy in the idea that you're gaining a lot of resources for the things that are actually important to you. Okay. Hello, can you hear me, guys?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
We're just silently acknowledging your wisdom.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't really have anything to say other than like to echo that.
All right.
Saying I agree feels like I'm just taking over the podcast.
Yes, in fact, I'm actually a bit worried. I'm colonizing your entire podcast. Well, our entire podcast. But
can I just say, as the only English person on here, I'll do the colonizing if that's okay.
well, I mean, Italy does have its own empire and stuff. So,
I mean, the Roman Empire was quite big. I'll give you that.
Yes. No, actually.
What can I say? On the one hand, Poland was at one point a superpower. On the other, from one point in time onward, we were not. Although at some point we were also supposed to have Madagascar as our colony. I mean, at this possibility. I mean, we can get it up actually. I mean, never mind.
Sorry, there's a Polish colony in Madagascar.
No, I meant that Madagascar at one point was supposed to be Polish colony.
Oh, I see.
Always, it seemed like a possibility.
Yeah. Oh, right. That's okay. I shouldn't be allowed on the internet when we're recording these because I'm just looking up the Wikipedia article, colonization attempts by Poland, which is...
But there are some Haitian people which consider themselves Polish because they have like 10% of Polish ancestry.
Yeah.
Okay,
cool.
Never mind.
No, I think that's one of my favourite things of podcasts, is just like going off on a complete tangent. And as long as you get on with the hosts, then it all works.
Yeah. And I mean, Italy actually is the fantastic example of a country in which its colonies were net negative. Like during the fascist regime, Italy colonized a couple of small African countries and lost a ton of manpower and resources for stretches of empty desert.
Oh, why?
Libya and Eritrea, I believe.
No, I mean when?
Oh, a bit before World War II.
Huh.
Like, I think in the 20s or 30s.
Just to bring us back to the blog post. Yeah.
Thank you.
This is it's a long quote from the end of the paper, but I tried to sum it up better and I couldn't. I think actually that's a really good thing of Nate Story's, that his information to word ratio is really high and there's not many wasted words. But the quote goes like this: harness the perfectionist within you and point it towards the goal of hitting your target with minimum effort. Instead of being a perfectionist about the paper, be a perfectionist about writing the paper. Be a perfectionist about writing and identifying good strategies, about abandoning sunk costs and killing your darlings and noticing when you're done. Be a perfectionist about wasting no attention. Be a perfectionist about learning from your mistakes. And I really like that because it reminds you that actually, if the task is write a paper about the American Civil War or whatever, the task is actually 100 different things. It's research and it's summarizing and things like that. And I don't know, it's another way of motivation of saying, oh, I'm bored about writing this paper, but you can break it down and say, but I like the challenge of summarizing something, and it gives you another avenue to like attack the paper with, even if you're tricking yourself into doing the paper without realizing it.
Okay, and I have another personal experience to talk about at this point. In my job, in quality control, big part of a difficulty I've encountered in new hires is to make them stop obsessing over whether a particular lot of product is good or not. I mean, once you've done the analysis, once you've gone the data, it's no use comparing it to everything that's been produced so far in the past. It's much more important to actually give a definite answer immediately over whether you personally can give your blessing to this product for it to be shipped or want to bring it to the higher ups. Especially because the failure state of that, which I've seen done a ton of times, is the product gets shipped anyway without having been controlled or without the controlling process having been finished, which equates to it not having been controlled at all.
The way you framed that, it reminded me of that scene in Fight Club where Edward Norton is talking to somebody on a plane and he's saying there's a formula for working out if they should do a recall on cars, and it's like, how many people died in like this car error, and would it cost more to replace the cars than the negative press of like a few people dying?
I mean, it's callous, but it does make sense, especially because, I mean, I'm of the opinion that human lives do not have infinite value. They must have a certain type of finite value.
I broadly agree with you. My life has infinite value. Your life probably doesn't have infinite value, but
your life may actually have an infinite value, but you certainly do not act as if your life had an infinite value, because if you...
Yeah, I cross the road and things like that.
You do everything to maximize your expected longevity or something like that.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to cryogenically freeze myself. Well, I'm going to pay somebody to do it. So that, in a way, is like following that infinite value.
Okay, I haven't found any services in Italy. Well, we can talk about this later.
Yeah. That'll be on the Patreon exclusive. Us just Googling cryogenic companies in Italy.
Yeah, our first AMA.
I know I just said that the information to word count is really high with this, but I just realised when we were discussing it that there's a quote from Voltaire of "Perfect is the enemy of good," which I have heard quite a lot in rationalist spheres and things like that. But yeah, I think actually, like, if you only have 5 words or something like that to pass on a point, it's sometimes good enough is good enough, and you don't have to stress about actually, getting a perfect mark or something like that. If you just care about passing, then that's enough. And what you were saying about QA testing, you can, every new batch of whatever you produce, you could check it against every single one in the back, or you could check it against the last 5, and that's probably going to be good enough.
Yes, and more specifically, the best quality control would be to use the entire batch for its intended purpose and see if it's up to specs or not, thereby completely using up the batch. I mean, it is like the reduction ab absurdum, but that's why it works.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. On this podcast, we like to end every blog post with a quick message that we think each host thinks separately summarises as much of the blog post as possible. With me, I'm just going to go with what I said earlier in the discussion, saying that perfect is the enemy of good. I had a housemate who was trying to buy something for as cheap as possible, but until he bought it, he kept having to spend money on another product. And after a week of him looking, I was just like, look, just buy the best thing you can find rather than spending 6 months finding the perfect thing and losing money every time. So yeah, perfect is the enemy of good is my sort of take-home message from this blog post.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe I even would reformulate that and say that actually just good enough is more perfect than perfect in many circumstances, and probably in most circumstances. And I think the main thing that I would say we should take away from this post is try to develop a habit of noticing situations where you are tempted to go full in, but actually if you detach from the situation and look at it more objectively and more dispassionately, then you may realize that actually you don't care about this outcome that much, and you would be perfectly happy with just getting halfway there with 10 times less effort, just half-assing it instead of going full in.
Okay, in my own advice is to you, dear reader, I'm going to be somewhat disquieting and vaguely anxious, but try to separate as much as possible your own motivations from those of the people around you. That is what makes people waste so much effort. Like we said when we spoke of this post, a lot of times people waste good effort after bad because they feel pressured by everybody to do so. So try to realize what you want and what the people around you want you to want.
I think that's really good. Absolutely. I think you summed it up really well there, Mike, with do what you want to do, not what other people want you to do. And again, really obvious advice, but just hopefully hearing it in this context, in this phrasing, is what people need to hear to apply to their own lives. Yeah, common sense isn't that common.
Yeah, also one of the later posts in this series is exactly about the obvious advice very often isn't actually that obvious as it seems in hindsight. I think it is mostly about like developing a habit about noticing situations where you are tempted to go full in and put as much effort into something as possible, whereas actually you detach from that and look at it more objectively and more dispassionately, you realize that actually you don't care about the thing that much and you would be perfectly happy with doing it, just half-assing it.
Well, that's good to have a preview for the future then.
See, I was going to call it spoilers, but yeah, I suppose a preview counts as well. And then the next blog post that we're reviewing is called Failing with Abandon, and it's quite a short one.
Okay, you know Lisa Simpson's? Lisa Simpson features prominently in this post. Well, in our podcast. Well, I will be talking about Lisa Simpson.
Where is this conversation going?
Oh, God.
It opens with, this is a short public service announcement, you don't have to fail with abandon, and it's basically saying for the whole blog post is, if you realise you're suddenly like failing at one target you set yourself, the example he gives is finishing playing the game Civilization at midnight, and then you look at the clock and you realise it's 1:15, that's fine, you can stop then, you don't have to say, well, it's too late now, I've missed my target, so I'm going to fail completely and utterly. It's okay to stop as soon as you realise you failed and don't fail any further.
Is playing Civilization late in the night some common like trope in Rad Circus? Because if I recall correctly, Scott Alexander also has one blog post where he uses this as an example, but in this case it is an example of to illustrate how shifting shelling points works.
I think maybe one blog post influenced the other.
Maybe that's possible.
My impression is definitely like Civilization is like crack for rationalists because it combines so many things together into like an enjoyable game, and it's quite gamified. Even for a game that you've got all these targets that you're trying to hit, and when you hit them, you can do more. And the dopamine hit is very nice.
Yeah, the dopamine hits generally are quite nice. That's true.
All right, there's something that I just thought about regarding failing with abandon, and it's the fact that I think that it has a root cause in common with the failure mode that half-assing it with everything you've got fights. Basically, people who should half-ass what they're doing are following kind of a lost motivation, or a motivation that they feel obligated to follow, and people who fail with abandon at a subconscious level have already realized that that motivation is not good for them, and so they're kind of looking for an excuse to get out of it. What do you guys think?
I think this may be the case in at least a significant fraction of cases. I'm not sure if it's the case in all of them.
I think it's a really... I agree with that it might not be a case in all of them, but I think there's a really good point there that, yeah, if you fail a class and you say, fuck it, I'm going to fail all my classes because nothing matters anymore, then probably you weren't really that motivated about classes in the first place. And to go back to the example from Nate, it's, you don't have to get 100% on every exam if you only care about passing the exam. If you care about passing the exam, then you won't feel the pull to fail with abandon and fail all your exams if you only miss one. Maybe it's just reminding yourself what you actually care about.
Yeah, and maybe in this case you are pursuing this lost cause, or just you pretend, sort of, that this is something you care about, to signal to others that you are the person who is concerned with such things and who tries to pursue such things. But whenever there happens to be an excuse for you to drop this course and go on to something that you really want to do, so what you think, okay, now that I have already signaled that to others such and such thing, now I have an excuse to drop this course, and I have already accomplished what I maybe subconsciously wanted to accomplish, which is just to signal.
This kind of agrees with the idea of perfectionists. The people that take pride in saying, oh, I'm a perfectionist, I cannot do something unless I do it 100% the way that it's supposed to be done, and often wind up doing 0% of the work.
Yeah, so it suggests that at least some of these perfectionists actually do not care about the outcome of their work, but they care about being perceived as perfectionists. Okay, maybe.
I feel like this whole series of blog posts is going to be very kind of anti-perfectionist.
Well, that's something I can surely get behind.
Yeah.
I hate perfectionists. I'm not one myself. I wish I was.
I mean, we just talked about the fact that being a perfectionist is not a good thing. So...
Yeah, no.
Well,
I agree. It is something that Nate keeps coming back to.
Well, being a perfectionist is kind of necessary in some very specific subfields, like production of microprocessors, but not in everyday life usually. Like when you are producing very small pieces, then they have to really be, like, for example, something like 99.99% pure silicon or something like that. But yeah, in everyday life, you don't need to be so precise.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's maybe like the definition of perfectionist, like how literal do you want to be? Because we probably have the technology to get to 100% silicon. It would just take the entire world GDP to get there for a 1 kilogram block. So
yeah, also, yeah, there are diminishing returns.
So it's kind of like good enough. I don't know.
No,
maybe we should call ourselves like the Good Enough podcast rather than.
Yeah.
Because I think that's a good point that Nate keeps making again and again, and I'm definitely like a good enough-ist rather than a perfectionist.
Say that's half-assing. If everything you've got, you could also rephrase as good enouging with everything you've got. It's basically the same thing, just emphasizing different aspect.
So Mike, you promised us something about Lisa Simpson.
Yes. Basically, it's the thing that I immediately thought of when I finished reading the blog post Feeling with Abandon is a specific episode of The Simpsons, specifically Sleeping with the Enemy, episode 3, season 16, where, I mean, this is completely against everything that The Simpsons had done before or since, but Lisa Simpson has an eating disorder, and she winds up confronting this cake in the dead of night. She's looking at the cake, she says, no, I'm going to stick to my diet. I'm not going to eat it. I'm just going to go upstairs and go to sleep and lose weight. And to make things even harder for myself, I am going to take a dollop of cream and put it in my mouth. And she does that. And this is this step that perfectionists do, I think, making things deliberately more difficult for themselves. And then she loses all impulse control. she starts gorging herself on the cake. And once she's got like half of her whole head inside the cake, she stops and says, "Wait a second. If I stop now, I can still recover some dignity. I mean, I will have known that I was able to stop myself." And she doesn't. She does. She just keeps eating everything and making a huge mess of herself. But that is the essence of failing with abandon. The moment where you realize that
Yeah.
you're already halfway to the abyss, but you can stop your descent, and you don't.
There's a blog post later in the series, so I guess spoilers if you don't want to know what happens later in the series until we get there, called "Becoming a New Homunculus," where it's a really cool like brain technique where you just pause and you think, okay, reset everything and look at the situation again. And in this case, do I want to keep eating this cake? Like, does a completely new, reinvigorated person want to keep eating this cake, or do they want to walk away?
Yeah, it's basically an exercise in looking with fresh eyes and abandoning all of your sunk costs.
I mean, in that case, what Lisa could have done is stop, clean herself up, and then grab a plate and forks and knives, and eating like a civilized person.
Yeah, for example.
There is like a thing with food, that food for me, or at least for a lot of people, ultimate kind of like motivator almost. Like, food is so good. It's a super sensation that like the food we have now is so sweet and it's just got just the right amount of fats and things like that, that if you do put a dollop of cream in your mouth, you're awakening all of these senses inside of you, which are basically impossible to overcome.
Yes.
Don't live your life on hard mode by doing that, especially if it's something like food.
It's not live your life on hard mode, some name of another post in the series?
Yeah, so I think for people that don't know there's a blog series called "Don't Worry About the Vase" or Vase, called
From Svi?
Oh yes, the coronavirus news.
Exactly, yeah.
Guy,
So
yes.
we'll definitely put this in the blog show notes for everyone. There's a blog called the Zvi, ZVI, also known "Don't Worry About the Vase," and he just got a blog post there saying playing life on hard mode, and the gist of it is my understanding of just, if you make it harder for yourself, you can you get better quicker, and you reach a higher level of technique. But also, not really explicit in the Zvi blog post, but generally aware, is if you make it so hard you fail, then you fail anyway. So consider playing life on easy mode. There's no shame in that.
Yeah, or basically...
And that's why I've enabled easy mode on Hades.
On what, sorry?
Because that game was kicking my ass. Hades, the Supergiant Games game.
Oh, Hades.
Hades, yes.
Yeah.
And I mean, I enabled it once I realized that I wanted to finish the game to see the story instead of mindlessly grinding for the rest of my life.
When I had more time, I used to play video games on hard because I liked the challenge. But now I'm just like, I just want the story, so easy mode.
Yeah, although also some games are so basically so easy that it would be very, very boring just to play them not on hard mode. Like, for example, this is at least for me the case when I was playing Ori and the Blind Forest and the second part.
All right. Anyway, I think that we can stop with this section.
Yeah, like I said, it's a very short post, blog post, this one specifically, that we're doing. So if you've got time to just summarise a quick take-home message for everyone, do it. Or if you don't, then that's fine, and I'll finish it off with Matt.
Well, actually, I do have a quote. Do not let despair overtake you.
Yeah, I think I agree. What you said there reminds me of the other thing you said earlier in the conversation, which was that good enough is good enough. If you failed, then your target, then that's fine. It's okay. But it's good to leave it at okay rather than like doubling down on your failure and making it absolutely terrible. So if you've only just failed, then leave it at that. Cool, that sounds good. So next episode we're going to be discussing the blog post Replacing Guilt, which is the name of the series itself and actually what you're meant to be doing as well. So hopefully a lot of useful discussion and information in there. And we're also going to be discussing the blog post, The Stamp Collector. My name is Nick, and our thanks go to Nate Soares, who wrote the original series of blog posts,
Gianluca Truda, who turned them into a podcast,
and the hosts of the Base and Conspiracy podcast, who have recommended this series.
And not only have they recommended this series, but also thousands of other units of help they have provided.
Thank you to the Council of the Guild of Servants, who encouraged us to produce this podcast.
And for this episode, I would also like to give shout out to Bart, who lent me his high-class mic.
That's great. I feel like we should end with saying something together at the same time. No, what is true is already so.
Alright, let's say it. 3, 2, 1. What is true
is already
so. Oh, that was awful. I don't want to be the person who has to edit that together, but we'll give it a go.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, good to chat with you guys. I'll talk to you soon. And good, of course, to be with you, reader. Thank you, reader. It's like when you play video games and in the credits it's and thanks to you, the player.